We have another presentation before our afternoon tea break. This next presentation is on disaster waste management planning with Natalie Fries, the business group leader from GHD. And Natalie, yes, here, great. Can we have a round of applause and welcome Natalie Fries up to the podium?
Great. Thanks very much. So we are actually not going to be talking about disaster waste management. We are doing a piece of work there with City of Darwin, but it hasn't progressed enough to present on. So today we are going to be talking about the key findings from a waste industry market assessment that we undertook with the Department of Trade, Business and Innovation earlier this year. So there's a fair bit of content to get through, so I'll get underway. Firstly, thank you for the introduction. I would also like to acknowledge the Larrakia people, the traditional owners of the lands in which we meet today. So as I said earlier this year, we completed this assessment. The objectives of the study were really around identifying opportunities with the highest potential for promoting and developing the development of the waste management industry and supporting the NT government's economic growth objectives. So we really included a wide range of waste streams. So the focus of this study was not so much on environmental outcomes as such, but on opportunities for industry growth and development, and particularly developments that could lead to sustained employment creation in the NT. So basically the assessment took us through a stakeholder consultation element, which some of you may have participated in, and thank you for that. We went through an identification of waste processing options, so a long list of potential options. We then went through an evaluation process to narrow those into a shortlist, and then we did a deeper economic evaluation on 3 options. So that's what I'm going to take us through this afternoon. So in terms of the industry consultation, we really wanted to understand some of the barriers to investment in the waste industry, and also what policy settings could be conducive to waste industry development in the NT. We did have targeted consultations, and we selected industry and government stakeholders. So we undertook the consultation through a questionnaire just to test views on the commercial opportunities, potentially unutilized capacity in existing facilities, and the risk appetite for new investment. We spoke to around 40 organisations, departments, businesses and individuals. And we also interviewed some specialist processors in other states of Australia who had operations that are relevant to this project to gain insights into whether they had or might consider investing in waste processing in the NT, and if not, what would need to change for them to do so. We considered some of the projects that are currently already planned and in development. You can see those listed there, and we included them in our assessment, so we didn't seek to exclude some of these ones. So out of the consultations, the findings were, and most of this stuff will be quite apparent to those in the room, that there are some key challenges, and some of those are around the limited data on waste streams to inform a market, isolation from sources and markets, the economies of scale required for some of these processing facilities, some of the regulatory constraints, the lack of sufficient quantities of available waste, and the lack of available markets or demand for products. The challenges by the non-business stakeholders were around legacy waste in rural and remote communities, access to recycling markets, lack of infrastructure. And really the keys to investment were around market demand and industry commitment, and the circular procurement of recovered materials and products. To inform the study, we did have a look at the transport and logistics costs of either importing additional supplementary materials to the NT or exporting product. So we did look at the logistics options for material aggregation, supplementation and product transport. We modelled the costs via relativities between road transport, rail or sea, and this helped us really inform some of the options identification and assessment, and also played a part in the economic evaluation. So obviously Darwin's, it's a fair way from other major centres. So this is significant when we look at the development of waste industry markets here. So we looked at, in terms of the logistics, a range of products. And so baled plastic was considered, tyres, e-waste, crushed glass, liquids, baled paper and cardboard, and any other potential recycled products from these. So, in terms of land, we looked at the road and rail options. So that's just some of the supply chains there. And we also looked at the sea options in terms of export and import of materials. And what we found was there's no surprise, in terms of interstate transport costs, they are high, but of the interstate capitals, Adelaide has the lowest one-way travel and inbound transport costs for most materials compared to the other capitals. The export costs from Darwin were found to be significantly higher than shipping out of Melbourne and Sydney, which had a significantly lower rate of around $54 a tonne. The inbound transport of waste paper bales from Northern Australia was also considered, as was transport from interstate capitals. So what we found was that overall, given that the Northern Australian locations had lower travel distances, inbound costs for transporting baled paper from these locations was lower. There's no surprises there. In terms of the export, Singapore is currently the only direct export destination available from Darwin. And when shipment beyond Singapore adds at least $40 a tonne to the cost of getting materials to Singapore. So if you compare this with export from Sydney or Melbourne, which both have access to larger volumes of container traffic, there are lower transport costs, about 1/3 of what we would pay. And they can also get products to China, India, South Korea, and other destinations with major manufacturing facilities. So it makes exporting products from Darwin quite challenging when you're competing with the other Australian capital cities. However, backloading we found can reduce your road and rail transport costs, but there are a number of variables that come into play. However, multi-year and minimum volume commitments can bring these down. So the outcomes from the transport cost modelling were considered when defining and evaluating our waste processing options. And options that are likely to require feedstock supplementation to achieve minimum efficient scales via importation from overseas or interstate, and/or the export of value-added products interstate or overseas, were considered to be less cost-effective than scale-appropriate, locally sustained options here in the NT. So as I said, we looked at a whole range of different options in terms of a long list. I'm not going to read all of these out, but we'll comment on a few in the context of potential reprocessing and value-added product manufacturing in the NT. So sorted and baled mixed paper and cardboard are currently net negative value in Darwin and near zero value elsewhere. So current markets are not making recycling easy anywhere. Glass processing is challenging by limited volumes, cost of processing, limited market capacity, and low net value. This is a high cost of processing, achieves a relatively low value add. Tyre processing has several potential markets and applications in the NT. So crumb to spray and seal on roads, tyre chip to derived aggregates for road subgrade improvement in wet and low bearing soils being a few that would be relevant. In terms of plastics processing, limited volumes, high investment costs, and although significant value adds are possible, proximity to markets and competition are key constraints. And organics processing, it's a proven and mature technology. However, the market development is in its infancy. So of all of these options, we considered a whole range of factors. And these factors played into our assessment of the long list options to derive a shortlisted group of potential waste processing options. So how did we shortlist? We took what we heard from industry. So we took on board the stakeholder information. We looked at the risks and opportunities that presented across the long list options. We had a look at alignment with government strategy and policy, because this can have a direct impact upon the viability of some of these options. We then undertook a multi-criteria analysis to score each of them using some of those factors that were up on the previous slide. And then we ranked the MCA and then provided some high-level economic analysis. So the MCA criteria, as I said, it was tied to the objectives of this project, and it was really around the economic viability of some of these waste industry processing options. So therefore, the economic benefits, economic constraints are weighted quite high in our MCA. We also then considered technical considerations and market considerations. So overall, we had a huge amount of scenarios to look at. So we looked at 26 different processing scenarios across 22 different scores in our MCA. So basically, we ended up with 500 individual scores, and we derived a top 10. What we found when we undertook the MCA, was that there are some common challenges around all of the options. So again, the limited data, the minimum efficient scale, your transportation costs, the capital investment requirements, feedstock availability, the complexity in terms of operability and maintainability, and the resilience to policy and regulatory changes. So the top 10 is up there on the screen now. So I'm going to do a bit of a deeper dive into the top 3, because that's what we did our economic evaluation on. But I'll just talk through some of the other ones and what some of the things we considered there. So a bit about plastics. So competition from larger states with larger volumes and better access to markets, both local and overseas, affected this one. And the cost of virgin plastic resins is very closely linked with the price of oil, which we know is at historic lows. So a recycled plastic product is competing against that at the moment. Industrial wastewater treatment and water recycling. The fact is that highly refined recycled water is expensive, and generally it costs more than potable water. So that limits the viability of that one. Tyres, there's been a lot of focus on cost-effective processing of tyres in every state and territory in Australia for a lot of years, and there are some really promising developments emerging, but tyre recycling is still a challenging business to be in, and there are some fundamental economic issues that make tyre recycling a difficult task in the current commercial environment. In terms of organics processing, there is currently limited processing capacity in Darwin and across the NT, and a fundamental requirement for cost-effective organics recycling is proactive market development. So, we know there's some exciting plans around organics processing at Shoal Bay to include commercial organics, and that's really great, but there's a bit of work to be done to develop the market demand, and the journey's just beginning. And what we found with the glass processing is it's another business that's difficult to strike a sustainable balance. And this is, between the cost of processing and the value of the product. So demand for the product for glass processing is often a function of price, and the cost of manufacturing recycled glass products often generates little reward to justify the effort. So what we found is that we're not saying that any of there's lots of potentially very interesting options out there, and there may be viable business opportunities, but they weren't the ones that we took through to do a bit of a deeper dive on under this study. So in terms of the shortlist, we shortlisted industrial liquids oil processing. We also shortlisted the industrial wastewater, particularly that coming out of the onshore gas industry and as that develops, and also mixed paper and cardboard processing. So I'll take you through each of these options shortly. What we did with these ones in our deeper dive was we did a high-level analysis of the actual market opportunity the key risks and sensitivities around that option, and also the capital requirements and the potential financial outcomes and job creation. So we drew on our stakeholder inputs and desktop research to inform the economic evaluation. We also put some consideration to COVID-19 impacts and challenges around relaxation of some of the restrictions and how that affects business viability. Okay, so the first one we looked at was the industrial liquids and recycled coolant. So, the need, we do generate large volumes of industrial liquid waste, and I guess similar to the previous presentation in the Pilbara there, these need to be processed, and to do it regionally in a local context is a cost-effective option. So we currently have, so there is an opportunity there for a local facility. And it was noted that recycled glycol and coolant is a product with strong demand and growth prospects. So that's what really pushed this one up. Recycling coolant in the NT could help displace imported product from overseas and or interstate and avoid significant interstate liquid transport costs and generate local employment. So what we found with this one was that, we know that an industrial liquids processing facility is already under development in Darwin. And so we use this as the basis for testing assumptions and for further evaluation of the industry growth potential of this option. This project involves a conversion of an existing decommissioned biodiesel production facility into an industrial liquids reprocessing facility that can, amongst other processes, recycle industrial coolant into remanufactured glycol for use in the LNG industry. Consultation with the project proponents identified constraints to realising the design capacity and informed high-level financial evaluation of the likely viability and key economic drivers of this processing scenario. So this was useful to assist DTBI in ensuring successful development of the existing project. The next one we looked at was, as I said, the industrial wastewater, or the product water coming out of the development of the onshore gas industry. So this planned development of the significant onshore gas industry has really identified a need for this cost-effective management of wastewater. It's also an enabler for unlocking regional growth potential. So the production of onshore gas will result in large volumes of wastewater, and the regulation of that industry will mean that there isn't currently a processing facility in the NT that can treat that waste, and currently it would need to be sent to either Queensland or South Australia for treatment. So development of a treatment plant in the NT would provide valuable transport cost savings for companies otherwise needing to truck it, and it would support ongoing employment. So what we found was that high-level analysis indicated that an NT plant may be able to charge commercially viable gate fees, as users would incur greater costs transporting the wastewater interstate. So that is an emerging opportunity as that industry develops down in the Beetaloo. The other one we looked at was moulded pulp products. So, the co-org export ban on waste paper and cardboard will come into effect, and therefore you'll have, volumes of this product become available. What we found was that declining market values and demand for baled mixed paper and limited local supply and logistics challenges presented by the remoteness of the NT and minimum efficient scale operation constraints effectively precluded consideration of manufactured high specification recycled paper products. However, export of baled mixed paper will be banned. So there is an estimated 30 tonnes of waste paper generated in the NT annually. And so what we considered was a pulp or a moulded pulp packaging plant for the NT to make use of that waste stream. Initial analysis focused on evaluating the potential for a small-scale production of this of a corrugated medium, so for use in cardboard packaging manufacture. However, further analysis identified that there'd probably be more positive global demand for molded pulp packaging, so you can do different things with it. We focus therefore on that molded paper option. Molded fibre packaging manufacture may have potential for development if an appropriate balance can be struck between processing scale, cost, and product alignment with local or regional demand. Further investigation would be needed to explore potential for development of a viable business case. So this material is gradually replacing expanded polystyrene as package inserts in cardboard cartons and for fruit and vegetable produce trays, and is used extensively for packaging eggs. What we found was that you can have a modular plant, so you can start small and produce a few products and then put other modules on and continue to grow the plant as the viability of the option increases. There's a couple of processing operators who are running with some of these smaller plants. One's down in Toowoomba, and we have found some suppliers of some pretty much off-the-shelf kit that can be used to produce some of these molded fibre products. So in summary, I lost my slides. There we go. So in summary, you know, in terms of the market assessment, the key issues really were around that limited data and data gaps. It's very difficult to firm up the viability of some of these options if you don't know what volumes of waste and types of waste are available. There needs to be further definition of an optimal scale and treatments approach. So how big do you need to be before you become viable? There's technological and infrastructure establishment costs, of course, to getting some of these processing plants off the ground, and then the ongoing O&M costs for some of them, you know, are hard to put a figure on at the moment. The evaluation of selected locations and transport options and costs will have a direct impact on the viability of these, as I went through with the logistics, and the reliability of your feedstock streams and demand for the products and services. The competition for end-use markets, so as the coag ban comes into effect, most jurisdictions will be looking at different options for some of these waste streams, so there'll be competition there, and also the market appetite for investment into these sorts of things. So that's some of the key issues in terms of building a waste industry market in the NT. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience? Again, another comprehensive presentation with no questions. I like it.
Just one.
Yeah,
if that's okay.
Yeah.
Excellent presentation, very high level. Is there any talk about actually from the remotes getting product into Darwin or your major centres down there, and the cost impost that would have on industry and the commercial viability of some of these? So I've just noticed it's mainly the Stewart Highway and your major routes rather than the remotes.
It's true. And, you know, and the remotes do present, you know, a real potential for different waste processing options. It wasn't part of our scope to look down at that level. It was really a whole of NT study at this point, but there's certainly some initiatives that are around in the, you know, regions and in the remotes that that warrant further looking at.
Great. All right, everybody, could we please put our hands together and thank Natalie Fries.